got to listen to that good crack. Colin, Nick, and Danny were tree maniacs. You got to listen to that good crack. How that sober life got these guys back on track.
You're very welcome to episode 28 of That's Good Crack. I'm Colin. I'm joined by my good friends Mick and Danny. What's the crack, boys?
What's the crack, man?
What's the crack, lads?
Keep 'em well.
Not so bad.
Lockdown, bitches. You know what I mean? So, on this episode of the podcast, we are delighted to be joined by one of Ireland's most successful DJs and music producers. He is a regular on mainstream radio and TV. He has 25 million Shazam tags, 200 million catalog streams across all streaming platforms, 45 million YouTube views, and the most streamed Irish DJ of the last 4 years amongst many other accolades. John also produces and presents a very successful podcast called Alchemy Radio that examines the world that you don't see in the mainstream media. John lives a drug-free life, and he is here this evening for the second time as our first repeat guest. John, what's the bleeding story, pal?
Mr. John Gibbons.
I'm quite disconcerted by. I was hoping you'd leave me in the green room a bit longer. You wanted to get back there.
Everyone's been saying it, man. It's the best green room in entertainment.
Showbiz,
you know?
yeah.
Oh, I've never seen the likes of it. Send me back.
There's an after-show party there, so you're cool.
I'd expect nothing less, Mick.
That's cool. How are you keeping, man? You good?
Yeah, really good. Yeah, interesting times and adjusting to these interesting times. But delighted to be back. So thanks a million for having me, and feel honoured to be the first repeat guest.
Had to happen.
The friend of the podcast, the number one friend of the podcast.
Friend of the show.
This is it. No, so I suppose when we were thinking of another guest, and I said to the guys, of all the people I've ever met in my life, John Gibbons is the king of productivity. That this lockdown thing will not affect that man's productivity, and it's something that I've kind of struggled with a little bit here and there. Like my time is all over the place at the minute. I might get really productive at like 8 o'clock in the evening till 2 in the morning, you know what I mean? But I have failed to maintain that really healthy structure of workflow, and, you know, not even just workflow, even exercise and trying to get out and do stuff. So it's like, it'd be interesting to see where John is at during this time, and how has it affected you, or has it at all? Or
well, yeah, number one, it certainly has affected me. Apart from the shock of how quickly all this has happened and how much of our reality, if you like, has changed. From a productivity point of view, I'm quite philosophical about things, and we've spoken about like philosophies before when we were talking. But I'm actually quite able to absorb a blow, if you like, and get back on my feet and kind of try and see the positive in potentially what could be perceived to be a negative situation. So from my work point of view, my gigs have been pretty much wiped out overnight, which financially is my bread and butter. So there's the hammer blow for me, and I don't know when that'll return. It will at some point, but God only knows when. So the key thing for me was, number one, to try and keep my head straight, which is something all of us battle with all the time and have all our lives. Obviously, I don't think there's anybody probably on this plane of existence who doesn't have that battle at some point. So for me, it was, right, how do I keep myself in a position where I don't lose focus and I don't lose sight of what the important things in life are? Because I'm well able to preach and espouse the fact that it's not all about money and it's about being happy and productive and about that. But when the shit hits the fan and all of a sudden your income dries up overnight, how do you actually walk the walk that you've been talking for so long? So I took a couple of days to kind of think about it and say, right, well, now is the big test for me, just for myself, not for outward show or anything like that, just for myself to see, can I actually practice what I've been, I suppose, preaching for the last while in here. So I took some time and I felt sorry for myself and had a bit of a pity party for a day or two. And then I said, right, it's time to actually do something. So what would I be doing otherwise? This was the first kind of step in the process for me. And I haven't even thought about this in advance. This is just me kind of, I suppose, verbal diarrhea. And I'm learning from what I'm saying here, even myself. So the first step was, right, well, normally I'd go into the studio every day and I'd do a day's work, if you like. So that's what I need to continue to do. I need to continue to get up out of bed at the normal time, have breakfast or whatever I do in the mornings, and act as if nothing has happened while being mindful of this new reality. So what that's allowed me to do is keep focus on the creative side of my work, which is making music. So I can still go in, I can make music, which keeps my, for the best part of the day, instead of maybe, there's kind of a temptation, I would imagine, for a lot of people to check out what's going on in the news now, what's the latest update on this, that, and the other, hour by hour, go onto Twitter, go onto Facebook, or whatever it is, and get sucked into that kind of negative vibration rabbit hole. And that's a very, very difficult thing to come out of. And we've talked about the spiral, whether it's drinking or drugging or depression, in my case, or whatever it is. Once you kind of start on that slippery spiral downwards, it can be very hard to kind of grab onto, find a foothold and pull yourself up again. So I was determined not to do that. So getting my head out of what's going on in the outside world was the first thing. Not ignoring it, but getting my head out of it. And the second thing was to be creative in a different way. So that means, for me, up in my head, trying to think outside the box as to how, let's say this situation, this lockdown, whatever you want to call it, was to last for the next 2 years. What do I do to be able to somehow earn a living from the job that I love doing, that I've been doing for the last 20 years and I'm so used to doing, without having to radically change my life and decide, right, I'm going to be a carpenter now, or I'm going to get a job somewhere else. I don't want to do that. I want to continue with the job that makes me most happy and allows me to create. So how can I think of ways, by thinking outside the box, of allowing me to continue to do this so that I'm still financially viable and I still have that sense of self-worth as a man, in that I can provide for those around me, I can provide for myself, I can keep a roof over my head, I can put food on the table, etc., etc. Because there's a threat to that in my life all of a sudden, which hasn't existed up to now. So the key, as I say, was to get up and get into work as if nothing had happened. The work is changing in that there's far more focus now over the last couple of weeks on creating new, and I hate the word content because it just kind of gives me images of, like, I don't know, online influencers and what they do, which is fine for them, but it's not what I'm about. I'm about actually being creative and pouring some of my own kind of heart and soul into the work that I do, and creating music in my case. So I found that creative process, because I've changed my focus, and my focus now isn't on, say, the gig that weekend or the midweek gig that I have, or the schedule for the summer touring, or any of that kind of that. Because ahead of me, I had the busiest summer, and going into autumn and winter as well, I had the busiest year ahead of me that I've ever had. Lots and lots of traveling, lots of repeat gigs from some really good stuff that I'd done over the last year or two. And I really felt that I'd not just cemented my position on that international kind of circuit that I was doing, but I had made great strides in advancing this year. And I'd seen myself in a position where financially, after so many years of hard slog, that I'd kind of come out of that, and I'd managed to, say, pay off any debts that I had. And I just felt I was in a place where I could actually start earning some money rather than just scraping by. So that's kind of a bit of a hammer blow, because I'm back to square one in that regard. I'm trying to figure out, right, how do I earn a living from this all over again in a different way? But I've, in a strange way, enjoyed the challenge, because I'm far better equipped to do that now in terms of inside my own headspace than I would have been, say, 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, when I would have had different blows financially over the years. So I know for a fact that I'm not going to spiral into depression as a result of this. And the tools that I have in my mental toolbox are far more advanced than they were even, say, a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because I haven't felt that onset of depression. It's actually kind of spurred me on a little bit to make more of the kind of the talents that I have, or what the skills that I've developed over the years in my job. So there's a lot of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily use, or that I would have used years ago, that hasn't been relevant to me now. One of them being trying to figure out different income streams and how to monetize certain elements of what it is I do that I wouldn't have had to rely on for the past 2 or 3 years, because I've had an income source, that being gigs. So that challenge has been, I found it, there are two ways of looking at it. There's one, I'm enveloped, I'm right in the thick of it, and every day I'm trying to figure out different things and new challenges and how to broach them. But there's this other kind of philosophical side of me that's separate in a way, and I'm watching myself do that. And at the end of the day, I'm taking time out to actually say, well, what could I have changed today? What did I observe about myself? How did I handle that challenge? Was it good? Was it bad? Can I learn from it if it was bad? Can I improve upon it even if it was good? And I'm enjoying that process because I'm learning about myself as well as trying to figure out different ways to keep the show on the road financially. So I've discovered that I am kind of walking the walk, and I'm not all about trying to make money, which was an initial fear. In the first couple of days of this, I said, right, well, this is going to be the big test for me. Am I the way I've tried to be or tried to develop myself into someone who's not just focused on, because I know back in the past, for anyone who mightn't have heard our first podcast, I would have been very career focused and goal focused and money focused. And then when things went wrong, it really hit me hard. And it was like my whole raison d'etre had been shattered and I had to create a new paradigm for myself. And I've discovered that the challenges presented over the last few weeks, I'm not that same person that I was years ago. And I am far more secure in myself. And I know that as long as I continue on a path that is right for me and right for the people around me by extension, that I'll be okay. I don't know what way that'll manifest necessarily. I don't know what my job will look like in 6 months or a year's or even 2 years' time, again, in this hypothetical situation where it carries on for, say, 2 years, plucking a figure out of the sky. I don't know what my job will look like, but I am secure enough in myself to know that it will be something creative. It will be me still doing music. It will be me pouring bits of myself every day into that work, and hopefully other people then deriving some sort of benefit from it. So it could be a further focus on podcasting. It could be a further focus on radio. It might be going back to some stuff that had fallen by the wayside over the years that previously had got me from A to B, or, you know, from one point to another. Maybe that becomes relevant again. I don't know the answers for myself yet, but I do know that the overarching question for me, which was, how am I going to cope, has been answered emphatically with, I'll certainly cope, and I'll cope well because I'm confident that I know myself well enough to know what's good for me, and I'll continue along that path. So yeah, fine. Finances are going to take a massive hit over the next while, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how to pay bill A, B, C, or D. But I know that I'll meet that challenge, and I've met far worse and graver challenges in the past. So at the end of the day, money's just money. I'll find a way. We're all resourceful beings. If we really want to find a way, we'll find a way. The more important thing for me is to maintain creativity and productivity, and to keep doing what I do on a daily basis, because that gives me some kind of sense of self-worth and value. And I need to maintain that sense of self-worth. That's the number one most important thing for me right now. And productivity helps me with that. So that's all the motivation I need. It's like a positive cycle. That's the motivation that I need to remain productive. Do you know what I mean?
Deadly, yeah. Because it is a problem at the minute, the financial situation, isn't it?
It's a big problem, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't an issue and a worry. I do worry about it, and I do worry about it still on a daily basis. But I'm just secure enough to know that I'm not going to descend into that dark place that I would have, where I become completely unproductive, and then I'm no good to myself and can't get out of it. You know, I don't want to be reliant on others to drag me kicking and screaming out of my own misery or my own kind of bubble that I've created for myself. And I'm pretty happy that I've managed to avoid that so far. And I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of everything. I'm not going to pretend I don't have moments where I feel like, oh, sure, what am I doing this for? What am I even coming in for? I'm not making any money. I still have that every single day, and I have those doubts, but I am luckily at the moment anyway, I'm equipped enough to be able to drag myself out of those moments. And one of the ways I've been coping, the weather has been good, and I know we have our state mandated exercise or whatever that we're allowed to go out and exercise, but I just sometimes pull myself out of the building and take 5 minutes and go out and take off my shoes and socks and ground myself on the grass and just think about anything but what's going on around me. And it's amazing how a little 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute, 5 minute break can kind of recharge those batteries, and I can go back in and it's right. Well, I've pressed reset, and I'm able to be a bit more creative again, or I'm able to focus a little bit better than I was 5 minutes ago, you know, because like it can be very, very difficult at times, even on a daily basis. But I find that when I'm in that kind of state of mind, I take it 5 minute block by 5 minute block, or hour by hour, or whatever it might be. Whatever I need to get over that hump is what I do. and I'm kind of flexible in that. It's not, I'll write off today, I'll go to bed, I'll bury my head now for the rest of the day in Netflix or something, and I'll wake up and tomorrow's a new day. That's not the way I see things anymore. Tomorrow's never a new day. It's right. I can have a new minute the next minute, or a new hour the next hour, whatever it is I need to do.
Nice one, yeah.
And I found that serving me quite well over the last couple of weeks.
I find, like, John, that, like, in the morning, and like you were talking about keeping your routine, that like the morning time is a very important time for me. You know, it's, if I kick off my morning properly, like, you know, for me, I do something that, like, you know, gets me out of my head, and like I don't get stuck into YouTube and go down that rabbit hole, and I'm still sitting there at the side of the coffee table like 3 hours later, you know, like, in a way,
I
it's
can relate
like,
to that,
yeah.
Happens to me every day.
Like, I find it, like, you know what I mean, if I can start off my morning well, I have a little routine. I start, like, I do a meditation before I even get out of bed. But I, like you were kind of saying about that thing where you get overwhelmed, or you go to bed, or you do that. I call it being overwhelmed into inaction. That's what happens to me when my mind gets too busy. I get fearful, or, you know, and it could be just stuff in the back of my mind I've talked about before, and it really hits me in the morning. Like, they've shown, like, they've done, like, scientists have kind of tested it, that like what goes into our minds just before we go to sleep, we kind of meditate on that for the 8 hours. So if you're looking at social media, this new thing that's on Facebook, these videos, I end up like starting off with a perfectly innocent video, and all of a sudden I'm watching like women fighting on a subway train, you know what I mean? And like this, I'm like, hey, how did I end up on this? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. But like this kind of stuff going into my brain before I go to sleep, it's like, it's just not good. But if I get up and I do stuff, and for me journaling is amazing. If I find myself that I'm getting overwhelmed into an action, like I find myself, like I just kind of get down on myself, go into YouTube, do whatever. If I journal, just write, free writing, clears all that mumbo jumbo out of my brain. Make a list of things that I need to do. Another thing, brilliant thing for me for productivity is lists. If I just write down a list, I'm not trying to sort everything out in my head. I don't have that much brain power. I don't have that much brain room, you know what I mean? I only have a certain amount, you know what I mean? Me, definitely. And I find if I write that down, have my little list, I just do each one as it goes, and keeping it in the moment, you know what I mean? Not kind of, like we were talking about that. For me, I'm trying to keep everything in its place, you know what I mean, in its right size, you know what I mean? Go down to the fundamentals. And this is like something that Danny, he sent a message to us when this was all kind of kicking off, and like you, was in all that kind of financial insecurity and stuff. And he was like, you know, we have a roof over our heads, we have food in the fridge, you know, our loved ones are safe, you know what I mean? When I bring it down to there and work from there, you know what I mean? That I've learned to, like, you know what I mean? I had this, I don't know, it wasn't a conscious aspiration, but it came up for me when I was invited into Danny invited me into this meditation group, and it was an abundance meditation group, and some of the abundance things includes finances. And I kind of reacted to it, you know what I mean? I was kind of like, oh, Jesus, no, like I'm some spiritual God, like, you know what I mean, guru or something. I was like, what am I reacting to? And they actually talk about it like that. Money is good. There's nothing, like, we need money to live. Like, I don't want to live a life without money. I don't want that type of life. But it's just, money doesn't give me my self-worth. It doesn't give me my self-esteem. You know, if I'm coming from it from that angle, then it's a problem. But like you're talking about, putting it in its right size, understanding that I do need it, and getting creative, like having those goals. You're very goal orientated. I think, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm just presuming because of your, like, you know what I mean, how much you've achieved, that you don't achieve things like that just meandering through life. You set goals and you go, I'm going to get that. And me personally, I function better when I'm like that, when I just have whatever the goal may be, you know what I mean? I'm not talking about world domination. I'm talking about, I built a gym out the back of my house. I was scaffolding, you know what I mean?
I saw that video.
Genius. The best gym in Ireland.
Myself and another Colin, we were watching it together, and stop. Look, I would happily take up membership once this is all over.
I'm going to go into building them. But, you know, the likes of that was my goal for a few days. Like, you know what I mean? I've done that. And, you know, so these little things, you know what I mean, I find is great. But just to lead into what you were saying, that's all. You know what I mean? It's like, they're little things I find, you know, starting off the day well and having small goals, keeping it in the moment. Like, I am okay right now. You know what I mean? The future's going to have to take care of it. I have no control over the future. And, you know, it might seem easier said than done. And of course it is. But if I practice that And especially when it's not when it's not an emergency, you know what I mean? And just bringing it back into the moment. Now I'm finding meditation great for that. I have to say, man, I think I'm on my 4th go on this 3-week meditation thing.
I'm sitting here thinking you need to include me in the next one. When I heard the money side of it, I'm like, shit, yeah, okay.
Now I'm in.
I don't listen. Have to say, boys. Have to say, it's like, you know, it's just one part of it, but it's actually bringing that into it. There's a hold on a minute, like, you know what I mean? And I know lots of people. I've involved lots of people in the group. As I said, this is my 4th time around. I think there's like 12, and like loads of them are repeats. Like, you know what I mean? And where it's a positive thing. It's the exact opposite of chasing it. It's letting it come to you. Yes. Living a proper life, be open to new experiences, so don't be closed-minded with fear and all these different type of things. Don't go chasing it. It's like, no, I turn up every day and it's like, and I'm still doing okay. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, I have what I need. There's an abundance in my life without one red cent in it. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing about it. Do you know what I mean? I have an abundance of love in my life. I have an abundance of friendship. I have an abundance of talents. I have an abundance of all these things. Like, you know what I mean? They're there and they're just waiting to be tapped into. And it's like, so anyway, yeah, definitely, Colin. I will be including you in this one.
No,
and John,
in.
it's fucking great. It's great stuff. Like, I mean, and for me, see, this is another thing too. Like, you know what I mean? That, like, about productivity. For me, including other people is brilliant for my productivity. Okay. Right. When I became unemployed first, right, I struggled. I worked all my life. I worked since I'm a kid. Okay. And I became unemployed, and all of a sudden I was like staying up late and I was getting up late, you know what I mean? But then my son started school, you know what I mean? And it was like, I had to get him up and I had to get him to school. And every morning that got me out of bed. Why? Because I wasn't going to let him down. I'd let myself down. That's where I was at, but I wouldn't let someone else down. And there's something in me like that, where with this meditation group, I have to post them every evening. And like, you know what I mean? So everyone's putting in day, whatever done. So it gets me and I do it, and it's continued to do it. I've done it and I haven't been able to maintain this. I'm like living this a life, like, you know what I mean, 13 years now, and I've struggled to maintain the meditation part of it, which has always been a part of it, and I've struggled. But with this, because other people are involved, like, you know what I mean, it's that peer group thing, you know what I mean, it's just always helped me. And like, say, with the podcast, you know what I mean, if I'm asked to do something with the podcast, if it was me that was doing it, I'd struggle with but when I have, like, you know, I can't let the lads down, it gets me doing it. I just find that good productivity as well, you know what I mean?
Appreciate that, yeah.
Really do appreciate that. I'm glad we're helping you indirectly.
Oh, geez.
He's an old topper, that lad, isn't he?
I tell you what, top of the rack. One thing that kind of stood out for me that you were saying, Sean, is kind of, and it's something that I've, you know, been trying to focus on, because it's doing the next right thing, or bringing it back to 5 minutes, or bringing it back to 10 minutes, because I swear to God, like, I can go down that rabbit hole of the YouTube and the end of the world and conspiracy theories and all the stuff, and just spend hours, and then I'm in my head going, oh shit, right, I need to board up the house, I need to, you know, buy a rifle or whatever, just joking, like, yeah. You know what I mean? That's where my head can go. When really the next right thing could be just, let's just chill the fuck out, and I'll go and make a cup of tea, you know what I mean? Or go and grab an orange, or whatever it is, to kind of bring myself back into and Mick touched on it, back into the present, being in the moment, being into whatever you're at now. And the reality is, like, as much as I can go down those rabbit holes and get consumed by, you know, fear. I've a business here, I have 3 shops, they're all closed, I have to pay the rents. I can get in massive amounts of fear about my future. The reality is, it's not going to change this very moment that I have now. It can change. I can plan to see what's going to happen. I can do what you were talking about, and I liked what you said, you know, like, you know, imagine this is going to be 2 years. So what way can I evolve so that I can make money? And the reality is, and I'm a strong believer of this, whatever the fuck happens in the next month or year, I can handle, because I've handled bad shit in my life, and I think it's going to be all right, and I'll be able to handle it. Whether it's I have to come back to Ireland or whatever it is, I know that it's going to be all right. And me, you know, I grew up, it was a lot of worry in my house. I grew up with worrying about the future all the time, like, and I think that does more damage to my present than anything, you know what I mean? I can't get involved in what I'm doing, you know. And like that, I'm trying to find my creative side again. I'm, You know, it wouldn't be to the level that you're doing, but I'm doing bits of production at home. I'm enjoying it. I'm doing courses online. I'm trying to be productive. I'm trying to learn new things and get new tools. And because not only does it improve me as a person mentally and you know, other ways, meditation, spiritually, and I'm training every day. So physically trying to get all the aspects of my life right. Not only does it help me for the future, but it keeps me in the present and stops me from wandering to the fucking disasters that I can find, as he described it, down that rabbit hole, you know.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's really important for me to bring it back. And I liked what you said there, you know. I'm really trying to apply that shit in my life at the moment, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, it is easier said than done. It can be very tricky. And coming back to lists, as Mick was saying as well about lists, I use lists every single day. And I don't beat myself up if I don't get through the list.
No.
I just transfer whatever's left onto the next day. But it gives me that focus, and it kind of, I can micromanage my day a little bit better rather than being overwhelmed by, oh, walk in and what do I do today? There's so much to do. When you break everything down, I remember even in school, let's say we were given projects or essays or whatever it was to do in school, and I'd be dreading it and you think putting it off to the last minute. I found that the way I managed that, and the same thing in college, was just to literally micromanage it and to like sketch out the broader goal, if you like, that being the overall project or the essay, and then just tackle it little by little, paragraph by paragraph. You could sketch out the paragraphs, bullet points, then kind of expand upon the bullet points or whatever. And all of a sudden it becomes its own entity. You know what I mean? You just keep chipping away at these little bits and pieces, and all of a sudden, whatever it is you're doing, it could be a thought, it could be a project, it could be something in work, it takes on a life of its own, but it's a life that you've created for it. So it's in synergy with your goals or what you want to achieve. So I think lists are I mean, they don't work for everybody, but they do work for me. And I think they potentially could work for a lot of people because they're so simple. Do you know, I mean, we are rational beings too. I mean, for all our right brain activity and our creativity, everything, we do have a left brain as well, which is quite often overlooked when people start to look at the spiritual side of themselves. A lot of people have a tendency, and I would have been the same in the beginning, to veer off into the right side, which I was attracted to anyway because I'm quite a creative person, and to neglect the more logical, rational side, which, I mean, we need balance. It's that yin and yang, isn't it? So
there's an old saying, John.
Give me some of that left brain structure that I need to allow me to flex the right brain in the right way, if that makes sense.
There's an old saying, John, if it's not practical, it's not spiritual. I love that saying, and it's the truth.
I've never heard that, but I like that. Yeah, that
and
makes a lot
it's
of
the
sense.
truth.
Yeah.
And it just when that was said to me a long time ago, it just totally altered how I view the whole thing. You know what I mean? And I feel it is 100% the truth. If it's not practical, it's not spiritual.
That's really good. It reminds me, and I don't know why, maybe it's a vibrational similarity or something, but reminds me, I remember hearing not so long ago, I was listening to a podcast or a talk, or I can't remember who it was by, but the person was talking about how many people actually want to be happy, like how we place limitations upon ourselves and how we put obstacles in front of our own happiness. So he described a talk that he was giving where he asked the room, how many people want to be happy? And all the hands went up. Everyone wants to be happy. Of course we do. Why wouldn't we? And everyone put up their hands, and it was okay to give then an extreme hypothetical scenario. How many people would be willing to give up all the people they know and all of the lifestyle that they know and everything that they know and hold dear to them at this point in time to be happy? And not a single hand went up. So, and I thought that was very interesting because I would, of course, put the hand up. And then the second question, my initial reaction was, well, I'm not putting my hand up to that. What do you mean? But the overarching question is, do you want to be happy? And when I actually sat and I meditated on that for a couple of days because I couldn't wrap my head around it. And then when I got my head out of that and actually kind of allowed it into my heart space, if you want to call it that, suddenly it started to make sense. And it was like, well, it's about being happy. It's not about being attached to certain things or a lifestyle or even people, because there are lots of people in lots of our lives who are not healthy for us. And I mean, we've all encountered toxic people or whatever, people who just weren't good for us. And what's the best thing to do in that scenario, hard as it may be? Well, it's to cut ties. That's the only real way to do it. So for me, suddenly it was a really powerful analogy or metaphor or whatever term you want to put in it. That little story was, well, if you really want to be happy, you will be willing to remove those attachments to that prevents you from being happy. And it really, as you were saying, Mick, your ideas and your way of looking at things were altered based on one little tiny anecdote. Well, that was the same thing for me. It's right. Well, does that make me happy? If it doesn't, I need to stop being attached to it. If I'm holding on to it for some reason, why? I need to look at why I'm holding on to it, examine what it is that has me in some way addicted to it, possibly. Maybe not in the literal sense, but in some sense, maybe I'm spiritually addicted to something. Maybe I am addicted to falling down that YouTube rabbit hole sometimes, or looking at this conspiracy theory. Look at the ones that I can derive value from and work with those to the point where they no longer serve me, and then let them go. And that brings me back to the present if I do that. And the present is the most important thing, because whatever is going on in our lives, there are very few situations where if you actually bring yourself into it, let's say there's something terrible going on. I don't know. Let's say you've made a huge mistake in your life and you wind up in court. And there's, I mean, it's an alien scenario to you. And you've all these people in fancy dress, wearing wigs and robes and dresses and all this nonsense that goes on. And they're all going to decide your future. What's going to happen? Well, the fear is going to rise, obviously. I mean, fear is the great controller for us. One thing that this so-called pandemic has taught me is that the only real contagion is fear. And if you can grab hold of that fear, get in the present and say, well, right now at this moment in time, I'm sitting in this hypothetical courtroom and I'm terrified of everyone around me. But what's so bad about me sitting on this wooden bench looking at these people? Is there not a source of entertainment here for just this split second, this present moment in time? And now that's an extreme example. The answer being, well, it's not that bad right now. It's only, as you were saying, Danny, it's that fear of the future. That's what brings on the anxiety, or it's looking at the past, which potentially brings on the depression. It's anything that's not in the present can potentially, if we don't know how to use it in a way that serves us, can send us spiraling one way or the other, whether it's depression or anxiety or something else negative. And that's why, for me, the present is so important. At any little tool, whether it's a metaphor, an analogy, an anecdote, a myth, a legend, doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes it can be a smile from someone else that can put you in the present and you realize I wasn't there, I should be here, and things aren't that bad, you know? So, I mean, once we're able to take care of the base things such as the roof over our heads, as mentioned earlier, or the food on the table, and our own well-being, whether it's physical, spiritual, mental, whatever it might be, once we can do that, things can't, how bad can they get? They can't get that bad, really and truly, can they? I mean, it's only when we start comparing ourselves to other people and, well, that guy is the Ferrari and I only get the Fiat, or whatever it is, you know, that's when things look bad. But I mean, flip that perspective and you're driving around, say, in a battered old Fiat, and you look at the guy who has to walk everywhere. And that guy who's walking everywhere is thinking, well, look, imagine I had that car. But maybe that guy who's walking everywhere, from the perspective of someone who might be in a wheelchair and can't walk there, he's the richest guy on earth, you know? Everything is about the present and perspective and how we choose to create our map of the world. Well, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for me. How I choose to frame my world or create my map of the world and then navigate it is the most important thing, because without that frame of reference or that map, well, then I am just kind of swimming in the ocean blindly and I have no direction. I don't know where I'm going personally. So like even I've learned one or two things from what you've just said on this conversation. It was the same last time when we got on the phone the last time. I learned so much from your perspectives on essentially what is the same topic, and it's how to navigate the waters that we're in now. And I just think that that's so valuable. It comes back to what you were saying, Mick, about how that little bit of pressure applied from others, like the group scenario with the meditations, rather than just trying to do it by yourself, has enabled you to commit to it in a way that you weren't committing to it in the past. And I struggle with the meditation side of it as well, and committing to it, and I'll get a bit lazy with that, and one day becomes two, and suddenly it's a month and I haven't done anything, you know.
So with everything, isn't it?
It is, and I find
to maintain consistency in
in
anything it can be a challenge, you know.
Huge challenge, yeah, nail on the head. And I find when there is that little bit of healthy pressure applied, suddenly we can become the most productive or the most spiritual version of ourselves that we ever, like beyond what we thought we could be. And you just build on it and build on it and build on it.
I actually think a big, like, I really liked what you were saying about that. Like, do you want to be happy? That thing.
I was just thinking that as well, to circle back to that one, because it's a really good question. It reminds me a lot of stuff that we would have had to let go when we were, you know.
Yeah, and like, you know what I mean, to be willing to do it, like, for solutions, you know what I mean? That,
absolutely, yeah.
Like, and when you were talking, it was links in again, John, what you were saying about you know, and I understand why you can be a bit nervous. People can be a bit nervous about, talking about, YouTube and addiction or something like that, you know what I mean? But Dr. Gabor Mate, he says, like, addiction, he's, like, you know what I mean, a top guy in the field, like, you know what I mean? And he says that addiction is, I think I'm paraphrasing now, is when something that harms you that you can't give up. Yeah. And it's like, so that can be chocolate, it can be social media, it can be like YouTube. If it's like affecting you negatively, mentally, physically, like, you know what I mean, in your life, like, you know, and you can't give it up, like, you know, well, then you're addicted to it, like, on whatever level, you know. And it's like what leads into what you were saying then, you know what I mean, when you talk about, am I willing to give this up, like, you know what I mean, is this, you know, am I willing, and it's taking my happiness, like, you know, taking my peace of mind, it's taking whatever, you know. And so they, like, I mean, I really like the way that all ties in, like, you know. For me, it was just, it's a really simple question, and it's like something that's even there. It's been in my life all the way along on this journey of, people were telling me the solutions to my problems when I came around, and I was a know-it-all, and I was only willing to do what I wanted to do. On any given day, I was like, you know, I wasn't willing to turn up and do the stuff I didn't want to do, and I didn't get the benefits of it. Like, you mean, I still felt shit about myself, you know what I mean? And you know, but thankfully, I just kept turning up, and I was surrounded by people a lot of the time that was doing it. And I just went to myself, like, do I really want to sit in this shit anymore? The solution is there, like, you know what I mean? Am I willing to do it though? Like, am I willing to turn up? And, you know, like, everyone, some days, but I have found this good, man. I have found this lockdown good for that, you know what I mean? It's given me more time, and it's helped me mentally, like, you know what I mean, to have that in that space in the morning. I'm up like 10 to 6 every morning, and I'm trying to do me a few bits, like, you know what I mean? And sometimes just I don't do it, you know what I mean? I don't take care of myself in that way. But, like, I've been able to consistently do it now in this lockdown, and, you know, the only things I've been consistent with is my morning time stuff and not wearing pants. They're the two things I've consistently done on this lockdown. You know what I mean? It's like, I am wearing shorts.
We've heard. The neighbours are telling everyone, yeah.
Yeah. After I got arrested the first day, I said, right, I'll wear shorts.
Stand up, Mick. Stand up.
Stand up, Mick. Show us. Oh, Jesus, look at that.
No, but you know what I was thinking when you described, would you give up things to be happy? You know. It's like when I know from my own experience, well, the lads, it's the same philosophy, kind of those three magic words, people, places, and things back, you know, like when you're trying to navigate your way out of addiction and away from drugs, away from alcohol, you know, the three things like that were super important to me that I would have heard through different, you know, groups and so on was like people, places, and things. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, I had to give up a lot.
Any people, places, and things that are linked to your addiction, you have to cut.
Yeah, and that's addiction is unhappiness, so it's the same thing, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you know what I mean,
it's like to many things, Colin, as well. Yeah, it's what you're saying, you know.
Yeah, it's the same philosophy. Like, you can apply. It's like any of that stuff we would have learned along the way can be applied to life, because a lot of stuff John talks about is a lot of stuff I've learned through like. Recovery and giving up drugs and all that kind of stuff, you know. It's quite incredible. And you know what else I think is funny is four Irishmen sitting around talking about meditation. I think it's hilarious.
I mean, yeah, go back to your dad. If somebody had said that the four of us would be sitting here having this conversation, I mean, imagine the laughing that would have gone on.
Oh, Jesus. If you'd said it to me years ago, I would have laughed at you. Like, you know what I mean? I said, go on, you muppet, will you?
Same.
If you said it to 20-year-old Colin, I know in the same situation. But I was just listening to it thinking, it's great to have the outlet, though. It's great to be surrounded by people that have that kind of mindset, that don't laugh at you, that don't, if you say something that might improve you to someone, like to one of your friends, that it's not something that's laughed off, or because that is a lot in a lot of situations. You know what I mean? it can be like that about stupid things, about clothes, you know, small little things. Like it can be just, there's these weird fucking fixed ways of life, like, and if you deviate away from them, you're kind of,
Yeah.
it
This,
can, if
doing
you're not
this,
strong
sorry, go
enough,
ahead.
like, no, go on, continue, sorry.
No, but doing this podcast is actually, it's just clicking in my head here, even as we speak. Doing this podcast has actually helped me an awful lot with that, because when we start doing it first, we're talking about stuff that I don't generally go around talking about. I don't, like, I mean, if I'm at
Same
work
here,
or doing
yeah.
it, generally speaking, I don't turn around and go, oh yeah, by the way, I don't drink or take drugs. It's like, it's not really, you know, I just don't feel any need to do it, generally speaking, you know. So when it came to even the podcast and putting it around, I'm not great with putting out stuff on Facebook and things like that. I'm not just, you know, I'm kind of reserved in that way a lot of the time, you know. And so I just never put this out. I never put it out there, like saying I was on it or anything like that. Like we were well up into the podcast before I actually start to
20
put it out
episodes
there.
in it. No, for realsies.
Yeah, no,
Seriously.
but like,
No, I'm not taking the piss or anything.
No, I don't, but at that point,
He started using his real name and all. It was Sean at the start.
I was Miguel Sanchez up until 20. But it was like, but no, I actually started to like really start to look at it and go, what is behind that? Like, what am I doing here or talking about that is in any way negative or that I should be
Nothing, no.
anyway? There is not one single thing, like, you know what I mean? And it was like, but it was just something that was there. I just wasn't aware of it because, like, I mean, I lived my life one way. This new thing came into it, and it was just kind of, it didn't fit in with how I live my life. It was like, Jesus, that's really putting myself out there. You know what I mean? And it was like, but as soon as it kind of clicked, I was like, and it's been a really, I don't know, it's just been cathartic kind of thing. I don't know what it is. It's just been a lot. It's been really positive for me to actually kind of break that down. Just the awareness. That's all it was. It just, my awareness had to click and to kind of go out that train of thought that I had, or that kind of mentality I had around it. And I was just like, wait a minute, I am absolutely doing nothing wrong. It's only a positive thing that I'm doing. Yeah. Why wouldn't I put it out?
And if anyone, I see the way, if anyone has something to say about what we're, you know, I'm like, I don't go around going, hey, look, I'm off drinking drugs, but if someone asks me about it, I'm straight up about it. I don't care if they have a judgment about it. That's their shit. I really don't really care if anyone judges me. I understand it depends on, because there's some people in professions that it's not possible to be open about that. You know what I mean? And for me, I'm open about it. I don't go around broadcasting it, but I'm not really worried about what people think about it, because it's my past. It's you know, that journey has brought me to where I am today. And if someone has an issue with it, you know, that's their problem. And, you know, they're not the type of people that I really want to be hanging around with. And I was just thinking about something you're saying there, John. As I was saying, this old fella said to me years ago, he says, it's about, you know, living in the past and projecting into the future. He says, if you have 1 foot in the future and 1 foot in the past, you're shitting on the present. Which I really liked, you know what I mean?
Brilliant.
That was definitely made in Ireland anyway. That one.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I was like, that's fucking perfect. That puts it in you know, in the picture for me. You know, it was
edited by an Irishman.
That's deep.
There's a
man.
bumper sticker we need to start making. But
that's a
should
good
get t-shirts
idea,
with that one, lads. Yeah.
Yeah. But John, like, will we like, you know what I mean, go into a little bit about your podcast? You know,
yeah, of course. Because speaking of productivity, one of the upshots of Alchemy Radio is the name of my podcast, which people can find free, Google it or whatever. But it's similar to this podcast in that it's a conversation, and it's generally me with somebody else who, for whatever reason, their work has attracted me. It's not necessarily people that I always agree with, but it's an alternative view. It's the stuff you won't find in the mainstream. So I interview anyone from, let's say, David Icke to Clive de Carl. You mentioned Gabor Mate there, Mick. I've been trying to get him on the show for the last while, and hopefully we'll get that over the line this year. But that podcast for me has been quite cathartic too. And I had been neglecting that over the last while, under the illusion that I was so busy with the other stuff, with music and everything, that I just didn't have time for it anymore. I've realized, because I'm still just as busy as I've ever been, but because I've been forced to take stock of what I'm doing and what I should be doing and what serves me at the present time, I realized that there's something really missing from me, and that was the podcast, missing from my, say, creative output. And I only ever did the podcast for me. I didn't do it to be some kind of guru or to educate the world or anything like that. I did it because I was interested in the topics that I discuss on it for no other reason. It was purely for, in the best possible use of the word, selfish reasons.
And it's a very successful podcast, isn't it? It's going to get
it
thousands of downloads every
really well.
episode.
There's about, now I don't know how many are active from episode to episode, but there are about 100,000 subscribers, most of them based in the US,
Wow,
which is
fair play, man.
is a huge number. But I'd been kind of neglecting it, and I'd only done, I think, in 2019 maybe 3 episodes, whereas I was doing it every 2 weeks, and now I'm back doing it, and I've lots of stuff ready in the bag. So every 2 weeks again, we're back to speaking of productivity, back to a productive state, and I find it's not in any way negatively impacting on anything else that I'm doing in terms of trying to earn a living, you know, because obviously the podcast is.
Some sound has gone there.
I think we've lost John. Your sound's gone off.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
You're back now. You're back now.
Yeah.
Were you in the green?
I don't know where you lost
You
me.
went into the green room again.
Good lads, that green room. Speaking of addiction, I could get addicted to that very easily. No, what I was saying is, like, I've just found that coming back to productivity, which I guess is kind of the starting point for this conversation, I've renewed my productivity around something that I had forgotten how valuable it was to me. Do you know what I mean? Aside from any value anyone else might get from it, that's great, but that's residual value, because first and foremost, I do it for me. And that's something that I had been neglecting, and that this situation has kind of guided me back towards, if you like. There's a silver lining on some of the clouds that have appeared recently, you know? So, yeah, it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I'm sure you guys can speak to it.
We enjoy listening to it as well, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, John, I have an interesting question for me, but just as you talk there, because you obviously, if any of the listeners do listen to your podcast, like, there's some deep subjects in there, and it's like not of the mainstream, and you are well versed in them. You can tell when you're having conversations with complex kind of stuff, like you've investigated this kind of stuff. So you have a lot of information in your mind, say, let's say, that runs contrary to what is put out in the mainstream, okay? And this can be said at times, somebody could be called a conspiracy theorist or anything like that, but like legit stuff that's there, is backed up with evidence and all that type of thing, but it runs totally contrary. And like, you know, so you're going to come into contact with people, and I find this on a sometimes where I might have looked into I can go down a rabbit hole in an issue, and I can spend a lot of time in, like, reading books, listening to podcasts, doing whatever, and you meet somebody who hasn't done that, and they are on a totally different place, and they've come to their judgment around a certain subject because they've had some one set of facts, and I've had another, or they've had one set of information. Now, I struggle, right? I can't even dip my toe in these conversations because I struggle with it. I know I can't get can't put all the information I have gotten into that person's head. I'm not going to bring them around to my side of thinking. And it actually affects my mental health. If I go into social media and start getting into threads, you know, and arguments or anything like that, you know what I mean? I really, really struggle with that. So I have to stop. As I say to Colin or lads, I just hover over the send button on many a message and just go, nah, delete. I'm not doing it, you know. But like,
I can relate to that.
But like, do you struggle with that? Do you just stay out of it? Do you just stay out of those things, or is there a way? Because I'm fascinated by people I see online who can get into this stuff, and I meet them outside, and I might bring it up, and they're just like, oh, like, yeah, whatever. But they're like really putting out like information there. They'll have like rants, and they'll like have arguments online, no problem at all, and it doesn't seem to affect them at all. I'm like, I can't do it. Like,
no,
I mean,
it does affect me. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. I can sometimes give this like outward portrayal. Like if you hear me on Alchemy, I'll be quite calm about things or whatever, because I'm in that environment, you know. And I suppose it's a level of professionalism kicking in regarding my past in radio or whatever. But you sit me at the kitchen table with my parents and family and the whole lot, and all hell breaks loose on a regular, like, and has done for years. So no, I can totally relate.
Ruined
to that
many a Christmas dinner.
There is one in particular that I can remember, and I still maintain it wasn't me who ruined it. But anyway,
Flipping tables in the kitchen.
Turkey going across the
Christmas tree out the kitchen window.
Catch that, Granny.
Well, like,
You're all full of
believe it or
shit.
not,
everyone.
I am quite confrontational at times, and I enjoy a good debate. It's just in my nature. Like, I can remember being sent out away from the kitchen table down to eat my dinner at the bottom of the garden from a very young age, and that's never really left me. But what I have learned, particularly through alchemy, is being the show as opposed to alchemy, is that's a really good outlet for me. That kind of satisfies my need to discuss things and to get it out there. And even from chatting to the likes of yourselves, lads, or my brother is great with this as well, because we have a lot of similar views and we're with similar interests. I have one or two friends, which I didn't have in the past, and I used to get very frustrated. I find the more people who have kind of a common perspective on things, or even if our perspective isn't common, if they're open-minded enough to engage with me on a meaningful level and not just dismiss or condemn without examination, well, that's enough for me, because there's nothing healthier than looking at two sides of a coin. And then you can make an informed decision and discern, based on the information that you've been given, what kind of perspective or viewpoint you want on it. So to come back to how do I kind of deal with those really difficult conversations, I do opt out of some of them. And I find that I'm learning much better, particularly with family, when to opt out, when to maybe have a dig, because sometimes, I mean, I suppose it's a form of tough love, maybe wrong choice of words, but there are times where you need to turn the screw a little bit, or you need to kind of push home or drive home your point. And there are other times where the softly approach is much better. But I do think, and I mean, a lot of the guests I would have had on Alchemy would have spoken about this, and I've learned it the hard way over time through bitter experience. It's much more beneficial and productive to plant a seed and walk away. Maybe water that seed every now and again, but continue to walk away. Don't try and drag the plant out of the soil, because what you're going to do, you're going to wreck it, you're going to break it, you're going to meet resistance. Whereas if you can somehow find a way to plant that seed and come back to it again, maybe, I mean, it's up to you. It depends on the plant, how often. If it's a cactus, you don't have to come back to it for years, but if it's something else that needs to be watered every day, grand. That is a far better way. And I find, when I find myself being, say, triggered by somebody's resistance to something I'm saying, or somebody's opinion on how I am, there are a couple of little things that mental tools. One being that analogy or that metaphor of the plant growing and just plant that seed. Another one would be to, well, whose business is it what they think of me? Certainly not mine. Sure, isn't it that person's business what they think about me? And if I can deflect it in that way and choose not to be triggered or take offense by it, I mean, that is the choice, to be offended, to be triggered. No one can force me to react in a particular way to something, no matter what it is they say. Nobody can force me to react the way that they want me to react if I choose to not react that way. That's my choice. And that gives me back a lot of the power that I think, and I mean, again, bitter experience. I can only speak from my own experience, but I think this is common to a lot of people, that we give away our power and we give it to our attachments, or we give it to how the esteem we hold somebody else in. And we suddenly become like a slave to that. You know what I mean? And maybe we always want to seek validation from a certain person in our lives, and we become addicted to that validation because we put them on a pedestal. Well, how is that going to affect how I interact with that person, or how I interact with others in their presence? It can only have a negative impact. You know, it can only be a negative thing. So if I choose to detach myself from that, and it takes a hell of a lot of practice, and I'm still practicing every day, but if I can make a conscious decision to detach from how I feel about how they feel about me, or what I'm saying, or my viewpoint, or my perspective, that is possibly the most empowering thing that I've learned in my life. And I care less and less and less about what people think. I remember David Icke really, really impressing upon me how important for him, as possibly the most ridiculed man at one point in the world, never mind in the UK where he lived, and the effect that had on his life and his family's life. How, when he learned to no longer care what people thought about him, how it just suddenly opened up a whole new way of life, a whole new spiritual sense within himself. and he felt he could be the best person that he could possibly be. But it's only when you start working on that, you realize A, how hard it is, but B, how empowering it is at the same time. And that's the motivation to continue. So that's been a huge lesson for me. And I don't think I hope I'll eventually get there to the point where I literally don't care what anyone thinks. I'm nowhere near being at that stage yet, in the way that, say, somebody like David Icke has been forced to get to. Because I've had a much easier path than someone like him has in terms of ridicule or whatever. But I have had those moments and still continue to have them. So I'm trying to teach myself that every day of the week, you know. So it's none of my business what somebody else thinks about me. And I'm sure we've all heard that phrase from time to time. But that's my kind of real world application to it. And the conversations around the dinner table, to come back to that, have been a great lesson for me in where my limitations are with regard to the information that I have managed to successfully in my head disseminate and learn from. But when it comes to articulating that, it has to be articulated pretty much in a different way to everybody I encounter. And I'm not responsible for how they take that information on board. So that seed and the plant is the best way for me. It's maybe throw out a little bit of an opinion and let them do with that opinion what they want to do with it. They might never come back on it, but they might. And isn't that far better than banging my head against a brick wall or pissing against the wind, to use an Irishism, and just fighting with people all the time? Because that's no good for me, and that's no good for my mental health, for my spiritual health, and even at times for my physical health, because I've quite a strong physical reaction to stress. And that's another thing that I've learned to recognize the signs quite early on. So if I say, for example, get a rash in a particular place, I know that that's a reaction to stress, and sometimes to a particular type of stress, and I can link it back. There's always a delayed reaction too in me, so I can quite often link it back to a row I had with somebody at the dinner table, or on a phone call, or whatever it might be. So again, it all kind of comes back to, for me, how can I serve myself and be selfish about looking after myself? And if I can look after myself, well, then I am in a position to maybe impart some bit of information or knowledge that I feel I might have gained from to others. Whereas if I'm not in that state, there are days where I'm not feeling that way, I will absolutely make, as you said, opt out of those conversations. 100% not getting involved. And I used to be able to do that. I would take the bait every single fucking time, and I'd be embroiled then in a row that was never about what the topic of discussion was about in the first place. It became about personalities and about trying to win the argument, you know. You're never going, no one's ever going to win those arguments.
No. But it is like that. I have arguments with, not arguments, but I do have to stop myself in conversations with people that I class as headline readers. You know,
yeah, good description.
I'm not saying I'm any better at it like that, but when I see a headline, I read the article if it catches me. But a lot of times I realize that I just realized actually recently during this pandemic, that people don't, like, a lot of people don't read the actual articles or watch full videos. It's just reading the headlines and then use that news as, you know, to spread inaccurate and false information, which pisses me off, because at the start of this thing, for the first 2 weeks of it, man, I had bad anxiety. I didn't want to catch this shit. You know what I mean? I was thinking I was going to die and everything. Like, I didn't want, like, I had bad anxiety at nighttime. I'd be getting little weird feelings and anxiety and panic a bit in bed, like, and everything, thinking about this fucking COVID-19, you know? I'm at the point now where I just wash my hands. That's the way of not getting this shit. Just wash your hands and don't touch your face. After that, you can't do fuck all, really. Like, there's not much else. I lived on ships for a few years. I avoided getting sick because I just washed my hands. They have outbreaks all the time. That's why you see it now with all these cruise liners that are in big, big trouble, because when something gets out on that, it goes like crazy. And I've experienced that, but not COVID-19. I've experienced gastros and all these other things. So I know how to just wash your hands, man. There's nothing else you can do.
Just wash your fucking hands.
Don't wash your fucking hands.
Wash your fucking hands.
Don't go to the pub, you know what I mean? Don't go in and stand beside people in Tesco's. And, you know, there's just loads, just small little common sense things. After that, there's not much, like, you know. I've heard of people washing shit that much and using Dettol that much in the house that their children are getting sick, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've heard that, like.
Kills the stomach, that Dettol.
Yeah, and I don't blame anyone. Right? They're just scared, man.
Thank you for years.
Bottles of it.
You know, so it's a very strange time for mental health. You know, I seen a guy. There's a hostel near my house. You know, and I think it's a homeless hostel. I'm pretty sure. You know. And seen a young guy. He looked like he was thrown over the other morning. If you drink or stuff like that, in it, I think they kick you out. You know, if you act the bollocks in it.
Yeah.
So I seen him, and I was just looking at the poor fucker sitting there with his bag, with more than likely all his worldly possessions in it. You know what I mean? Just sitting there. He's only a young guy, 20, I'd say. I was thinking, this will sound bad, but I was thinking there's a prime candidate for someone that could self-harm or do something really bad. Like, you're sitting there, COVID-19 pandemics, everyone's at home with their families and that, and you're sitting on the side of the road with everything you own, and you're 20 years of age. Like, and I don't know why I'm going off on this tangent, but it got me thinking about what you were saying there, and that it's just like, it's a weird fucking time for people. Very, very strange. And I don't know, we just have to keep our heads right, don't we?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, it's kind of, for me, it's like, I went through not the same thing, but similar back, I think it was 2008, when we had the global crash, and I was working as an architect. I lost my job, and the whole thing was, you know, I talked about it before, but it's kind of, you know, as we're talking, I've been thinking about it, brings us back to our humanity as humans, what we are, what's on us. And the reality is, and I've really, you know, when I try and remember this, is everything we think we own is borrowed. Because the day that we're buried in the ground, none of that comes with us. Everything we hold on to tightly, everything we think we need to grab hold of, financial, my business, whatever it is, I'm a fear of losing. You know, the reality is, it don't come with me. The most important thing is my mental health, my spiritual health, my physical health, and the rest can be rebuilt. And I remember going back to, I think it might be the same old fella, I don't know, he said to me, he said, if you look at children when they're born like grabbing things, you know, they grab your finger, they grab things. And when you die with your hands open, you let go of everything completely. And really kind of one of the lessons for me in my life is learning to let go of the physical things in my life. And the reality that is, I'm going to die. I don't know if it's tomorrow, if it's in so many, and then it can remove a lot of those fears that are deep down inside me, because the reality is, we have all touched on it, is the only moment I have is now. This very moment right here, and trying to hold on to everything in the future, trying to dig up the past, is not going to fucking change this present, like, you know what I mean? And that's kind of the thing that's, I think, I just think that this whole thing has created a moment where we just stop and pause, and we have to go, well, what the fuck is really important? Like, what's really important? Let's take a big, deep look at ourselves, look at our lives, look at the things around, but look at our families, look at all, you know, all the things that are in our life, and what is really important. And it's like, you know, whatever the background of what's going on in, and whether it's conspiracy theory or whether it's not, or whatever it is, the reality is what's our lesson in it. And for me, the biggest lesson is, as tough as the days have been now and again, is really being able to look at what is really life about. Why the fuck are we here? Like, and just trying to be present as a human in myself. Like, if that makes any sense. I just went on a mad ramble.
That makes huge sense, and it sparked something in me, and it comes back to a conversation I was having with my brother only today. Like, what are we doing here? I mean, I personally think there's a lot more. I mean, when we leave this physical body, whatever it is happens, I don't know, but our energy converts and we go somewhere else. So that comes back to what you were saying, everything's borrowed. But what are we here for? If we're here, we must be here for something. So is it to make money? Well, clearly not. That's part of the borrowed thing. So it has to be some sort of development. So is that spiritual development? Is it energetic development, vibrational development? It's something in this kind of universal sphere. That's what I would call, say, the universe, you know, energy or whatever. So if it's about that, well, then we're here to elevate ourselves as to as high a vibration as we possibly can, to ensure that we're ready to go on to the next stage, whatever that might be. Perhaps, and I'm only speculating, I have obviously no idea, but perhaps if we don't attain that state of vibration, perhaps we come around again and we have another go at it or whatever. But the conversation that we were having today, and this is credit to my brother Stephen as opposed to myself. This was his kind of germ that really sparked something in me today, and I need to think about it more. But he said he thinks that we're here to learn the difference between right and wrong. And I said, well, what do you mean? Sure, we're born knowing the difference between right and wrong. And he said, but one or two things that he said were very, very powerful. I thought it was, no, true right and wrong, not in a legal sense, not what we're brought up to think is right and wrong in school, from parents, from peers, from family, from the media, from news. What inherently, we all have what some people call a soul, an energy, a vibration, whatever it is. The universe knows what's right and what's wrong. And what's right helps us to ascend, if you like, to raise our vibration. What's wrong is the descent of man, to use a biblical analogy. So it's to know the difference between right and wrong. And if we learn and act, and this is the tricky bit, the top of that Holy Trinity, the top of that pyramid, the Ben stone at the top, is action. So if we act according to the knowledge or the gnosis of what is right and wrong, well, not only our own lives change, and fine, we might have to rebuild, as you were saying, Danny, we might have to rebuild the physical things in our lives as a result of the change. And there's that ordo ab chaos, the order from chaos. But all of a sudden, everything else falls away. All the bullshit falls away. So let's say somebody decides, the world would be a better place if everyone realized that the world is flat, or the world isn't flat, or that the moon landings were a hoax, or the moon landings weren't a hoax. None of this would matter if we all knew the difference between right and wrong, because we would all suddenly, if we were all living that way, be able to discern. There'd be no such thing as a lie. There'd be no bullshit anymore. Everything would just fall away because it wouldn't fit the new paradigm that we've created and the new abundant reality, spiritual abundance, that being, as opposed to physical. There would be no place for it anymore. So it's like if somebody outgrows, let's say I'm an ant and I live in an anthill and I've been raised as an ant and everybody tells me I'm an ant and I believe I'm an ant. But suddenly I grow up and I can't fit in that anthill anymore. And somebody tells me, well, hang on a minute, you were never an ant, you're a beetle, you got bigger, you outgrew the size of your home. Then I have to reevaluate the whole world around me. And I have to realize, okay, I've got to live as a beetle all of a sudden. And I think we put ourselves in these neat little boxes that are either created for us by society or we allow to create for ourselves based on our conditioning or our upbringing. And that's that human, condition rather than human nature. I think the key is to get back to nature, get out of those boxes and allow ourselves to see what we really are, see ourselves for what we really are. So are we a beetle rather than the ant? Are we an eagle instead of a chicken that stays on the ground? Can we soar above all the chickens and all the hens that believe they can never do anything but lay eggs or whatever, So I think if we can learn and apply what is right, all of a sudden, a huge number of our problems begin to disappear and we do begin to ascend and we begin to raise ourselves rather than rear ourselves. I think we talked about the difference the last time we spoke between rearing and raising. Yeah, we can rear cattle, but we should be raising our children. And the language, everything is hidden in language. Why do we call it spelling? Because language casts a spell on us and that can be used for good or for bad. And I think some of the controllers, and I don't want to fall too deep into the rabbit holes we were talking about, some of the controllers of the physical world around us know all of this esoteric knowledge and they guard it so carefully and so closely, but it is there to be learned if we learn to decipher it and to decode it and to maybe with an open mind listen to somebody like, for example, David Icke. And I use him as an example, not just because I really respect the work he does, but because he is also the most maligned man that I've ever encountered in my life within his field of research, say. So people will, sure, David Icke talks about lizards. Right, you don't like the lizard side of things, don't take that on board, but don't shoot the
simple, isn't it?
Of it. Listen to the rest of his information, discern what you can get value from, and then work with that. And maybe you'll find yourself in a state or a scenario somewhere down the line where the lizard theory mightn't seem so batty or so barman. but don't just jump to the most extreme thing and then discount everything else as a result of it. Don't discount the journey. We're all on a journey. It's not always about the goals. Yes, I can set goals and I'm good at setting goals and trying to work towards that. But if I don't appreciate the journey to get there, and these times of kind of uncertainty and hardship are part of the journey. If I don't embrace those, well, then there's my slippery spiral and that slope again that I'm going to go down. And I refuse to allow myself to go down that without a fight at least. And my fight is a fight within myself. And it's not even a fight anymore. It used to be a fight, but now it's about living and acting in truth and in what I know to be right in nature, and to get back to human nature rather than human nurture. Nurture can be a good thing provided it's grounded in nature. Human condition can be a good thing provided it is grounded in human nature. Everything for me comes back to nature. I think everything, every story we hear, every myth, every analogy, the Bible, whatever it might be, every metaphor is grounded in an aspect of nature. And I think once we can, I'm not talking about running through the fields or the woods. I'm talking about the way things are meant to be, positive vibrations. And I'm not saying, good vibes, man. It's not about that. It's, for me, vibrations are the words I use to describe how I feel about being positive. And I think up is good. Down can teach us lessons, but we don't necessarily want to go back down if we've already experienced down, So for me, that's what everything boils down to. And it was really crystallized in that conversation with my brother today when he said, well, if we just learn right from wrong and act on what is right and stand on right, everything else falls away and things become simple.
You mentioned it, John, and I've had a couple of rants on the podcast about it. Like you mentioned the word truth coming towards the end. It's just another angle on the right and the wrong. And that I don't know, it just, and even it feeds back into that self, what you call it, when you're editing yourself, in the world, you're not speaking your truth, censoring yourself, self-censorship. And the further we're getting away from our sense of self, we're intellectualizing truth, so it can be altered. It can be people, stuff, it resonates with you. We've talked about this before, that when you're your brain isn't infected with all this type of stuff that you should be thinking, and you hear the truth, it just resonates with you. You just know it's the truth. Some philosophers will try to say now that there's no such thing as truth, and there's truth within us. And when you hear it, when you're open to it, and you actually hear the truth, it resonates and it ties into what you're saying there. And it's getting to that place where you can actually be open enough to listen to a thing with an open mind, discard what doesn't resonate with you, and actually what does. It's there. It is 100% there, yeah.
And I'd say one of the biggest things that stuck out for me from the last podcast, and it's been rattling in my brain throughout since we last talked, as in different parts of my life, is the word that stuck out for me that you had talked on was integrity. You know what I mean? And that was, and you shared about it in the last podcast, was just being true to yourself. And something that stuck with me is does this sit right with my gut and my soul and what I'm doing right here? Am I just, doing this to please someone else, or am I just doing, or am I being true to my soul? Am I true to myself? Whatever being spoke to me, or I see, how am I being true to myself? And that's, definitely a journey within myself, and, being, and the other thing that I was just thinking about it was a fantastic book that I read. Well, I'm not very good at reading, so I did the audiobooks. Journey of Souls by Michael Newton. And it talks about that journey after we pass away. And it's, I'm not going to go into the details, but it's that kind of, I believe, and it's my own belief, that I'm here to learn the lessons for my soul to evolve when I pass away. And if I don't learn the lessons on this journey, on this planet, that I will come back, and as mad as this sounds, to learn those lessons again until I can transcend into the next, point of my soul's journey, if that makes any sense.
Well, no, not only does it make sense, it resonates, to come back to that word that Mick was using. And again, I was struck by And by the way, I read that book on your recommendation, and what a powerful book. I've since reread it. But I was struck by something when you were talking about resonance and truth, Mick, and that being, we all know the phrase, the ring of truth. But what does a bell do when it rings? It resonates. It emits a vibration, a resonance. So like the ring of truth, as you say, it's already in us. We already know. We have all the answers. Again, not to get biblical about it, but I mean, the Bible says, and I am far from religious, but there's a lot of truth in the Bible, and the Bible says like the truth lies within us. And if we can get ourselves to a state where we are ready to accept that truth, no matter how hard it might be, because the truth is an absolute. There aren't actually degrees of truth. And any philosopher who says there's no such thing as truth, as far as I'm concerned, couldn't be further down on that scale of resonance, or that vibrational scale from my point of view. Because the truth does exist. It's an absolute. And it doesn't matter whether 10 million people believe something to be false and one person believes it to be true. If it's true, that one person is right. It doesn't matter what the mob says. The truth is the truth and can only ever be the truth. And another phrase that I don't really like, that you hear a lot, it reminds me of, we're hearing a lot of Orwellian doublespeak around this COVID-19 thing, unity in division and unity in separation, all this like war is peace type stuff. And it's, oh, well, I'm speaking my truth. I'm entitled to speak my truth. Yes, everybody's entitled to that. I mean, that to me, that just amounts to an opinion. And everyone is perfectly entitled to hold an opinion. However, if your opinion flies in the face of truth, well, then your opinion is incorrect. You're still entitled to hold that opinion, but it's wrong. And this phrase, well, my truth, I'm going to speak my truth, almost validates everyone's opinion. And it removes truth actually from the equation. Because if everyone's opinion is right, there's no room for truth. So I'm speaking my truth and you can't possibly contradict me because it's my truth. Well, I'm sorry, if it flies in the face of the actual truth, which is an absolute, well then, by all means, hold your opinion, you're still wrong.
Yeah. Nice one.
I think we're coming close to the end of it there, are we, lads?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I lost track of time there for a minute.
Well, listen, thanks a million, John. Really enjoyed it, mate.
I've just looked at the clock here. I can't believe what time it actually is.
I know, that's what I'm saying. We've gone for an hour and a half. I think this is the longest podcast we've ever had.
That was really enjoyable, though.
Yeah. It's such a pleasure.
No, it was a nice
like it was the last time. I'm buzzing,
yeah.
There's that vibration, that resonance, I'm buzzing just from this conversation because it's such a healthy thing for humans to do when you're on the same kind of level.
Yeah, no, this podcast has always been very good for me like that. You never could walk away from it feeling worse. You always walk away from this podcast after doing it feeling better than you went into it. For me, anyway.
100%, man. Sahara always says to me when I leave, she says, when I come out, she says, you're buzzing, like, you know what I mean? She says, you're in great fun. Because I was saying it to Mick, I says, I'm not in great mood for this today, and I feel great after it. So thanks, John.
No, well, thanks you
lads.
for having me. Like, it's a massive pleasure, a huge pleasure, and I'm looking forward to having you back on Alchemy.
Awesome.
Absolutely, sir. We'll leave it there, lads. But anyone want to say anything? Finish up?
I have something I'd like to say. Can I go back to the green room?
Yeah, we're heading there now, so we'll meet you there. We'll meet you there.
After party, lads, in the green room, yeah.
So just for any potential guests that we might be considering coming onto the podcast and looking at this, just hit John up about the green room activities.
I will tell you the truth.
Your truth.
That's my truth.
All right,
lads, I have to put my robes back on because I was in the middle of a ritual here, as you can see.
Sacrificial altar, yeah.
Your sacrificial altar is beautiful behind you there.
And Mick has to go back to running around in his pants.
Or without my pants.
Or without your pants.
That's it, but thanks a million, John. It's been great chatting, man.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, nice one,
Thanks,
dude.
guys.
Alright, take care.
Take it easy.
Got to listen to that good crack.